Hello, and welcome to this episode of Tales of the Sea. I'm Mark Winkworth. My guest today took a highly unusual path to the sea. Anna Conathan is a stand-up comedian, actor, television comedy writer, life coach, and most recently a working stern man on a commercial lobster boat. She's also a mom, and it's clear that Anna is a multi-talented, multifaceted woman whose love of fishing and the sea has totally captured her imagination. I wanted to know what happens when you take a stand-up comedian off the stage and put her on the aft end of a lobster boat. What could possibly go wrong?
So I started fishing with Jerry, my current captain, Jerry Grondin, and he's hilarious. He's the only captain I've ever fished with who likes to sing show tunes. So we sing a fair amount of show tunes on the Achilles. We got caught up. One of the buoys went underneath. He doesn't have a cage around his prop. The rope from the trawl got wrapped around the prop, and we were stuck. And we couldn't go anywhere. So he looks at me. He goes, "Can you swim?" And I'm like, "I can swim. Why?" He's like, "Well, I think if you just swam under the boat, you could probably untangle this and then we'd be on our way."
Piece of cake.
And I'm like, "I feel like it is not as easy as you are making that out to be." So Jerry thinks that I am the solution to this unanticipated problem. I think getting a cage on the propeller would be a really great choice. So the next thing you know, I'm in a pair of biking shorts and my bra, and I'm over the edge, and you can't see anything without a mask or anything. So I'm trying to figure out how to get this rope. I'm under the water. I've got the gaff. I'm trying to pull it so that I can get as close as I can to cutting the rope. I've got my knife out. It's like something out of a James Bond movie, but not sexy in any possible way. It was messy and it was cold, but I'm swimming around and I'm thinking this is one of those things that my mother would be absolutely mortified if she knew that I was doing right now. Not because I'm in my underwear swimming in Casco Bay, but because I'm pretty sure everything I'm doing is not safe.
Oh, I would bet on that.
And before I went in the water, I was like, "You're going to turn off the engine, right?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I can turn off the engine if you want." I'm like, "These are just basic safety matters." So anyway, I got under the boat. I was able to cut the rope free, but then I had no idea how I was going to get back in the boat because there was no ladder. There was no rope hanging off there was no pulley or anything for me to get myself back up into the boat. Meanwhile, Jerry's friend Jack, who was his mentee, now has his own boat. He had come along and was helping. Jerry's big concern was losing the traps that were attached to this rope. Here I am. I've never met Jack before. Jack is probably half my size and half my age. And Jerry was not able to pull me up off the back of the boat over the transom, which PS is covered in mud and fish guts and dead crabs and everything else. So Jack had to pull me out and almost ripped my chest clear off my body on the back of the transom. He just dragged me right up, peeled me right up over the edge and dropped my top half onto the boat. And I am just laying face down in mud and dead crabs. And then I had to get myself back in and back into my bibs. But it was absurd. But I think that was the day I won Jerry's respect. That's when he asked me to be his regular sternman, because he was like, "This woman is insane and will do anything."
Well, now that we know where the story is going, Anna, right off the deep end, let's go back to the beginning. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in New Hampshire in North Conway, and I grew up in a small town called Freedom, New Hampshire. And my parents were from New Jersey and Philadelphia, and that's where my siblings were born, in Philadelphia. It's a little on Golden Pondish, where I grew up. And I loved going to the lake. I loved swimming. All of my friends, affluence or money up where I grew up took shape in toys, snow machines, jet skis, water ski boats, lake houses, things like that. So I had the great good fortune of having friends who had boats and lake houses. And so I water skied and inner tubed and spent a fair amount of time tanning on the lake with baby oil because sunblock hadn't been invented yet.
Right. Did your family ever take you to the ocean?
Oceans were for fancy. Oceans were for special. We only lived about an hour and a half from Scarborough Beach and from Crescent Beach. And so about once or twice a summer, my parents would load us up We'd pack a picnic and we'd leave the house pretty early. We'd drive over to one of the beaches near Portland and hang out for the day. And it was a big deal. Portland was our closest city and I loved it. And we'd spend the whole day, but you got your fill in that one trip. And that was kind of it. That was sort of my relationship. I loved the ocean. I was aware of the ocean, but it was like a relative that I only got to visit like once a year. I just thought the ocean was mysterious and wonderful and weird, a little scary, but like in a fun way, the way kind of a roller coaster is. And I think one of the things I love so much about living in Willard Beach now is like the ocean is a year-round thing for me. If I don't go to the beach or see the water or go near the water, experience the water in some way for even a couple days, I find it affects my mood. It affects my psyche. I love being able to walk down the street in 5 minutes and be standing with my feet in the water.
I like that. Anna, I know that your husband, Mike, had a good deal to do with your developing passion for the ocean. How did you two meet?
Well, Mike and I met in Hollywood. So I had, from a young age, determined that I was going to be moving to Los Angeles to pursue acting. And I did that after college. And I met Mike out in LA, and he was a television writer. He had been in publishing, and some author that he had worked with got a television show picked up and was like, you should come be a writer on my staff. And so I'm like walking B-list actors' dogs, and I'm like a stand-in on movies. I'm doing anything I can to like stay in California and work. Then one day he was like, I hate it here. I want to change my career. And I was like, well, everyone hates it here. Like, what are you talking about?
Not an easy place.
And he said, I want to go back to school and get my master's in marine affairs and marine policy. And I was like, what's that? And then he started studying, and I started being interested in the stuff he was studying. And I can't remember exactly how I hooked into lobster and lobstering. I think it probably wasn't really until he started working on Capitol Hill with Olympia Snow and had to go to Maine quite a bit for work. And I would go with him.
Just stepping away from our conversation with Anna for a moment, Mainers will likely remember United States Senator Olympia Snow, who served in the state from 1995 to 2013. She was known as a strong advocate for the people of Maine and was passionately committed to the health and vitality of America's oceans, coasts, and fisheries. She was highly regarded for her integrity, her work ethic, and her collegial, non-confrontational approach to legislating. Now, back to our interview.
I started becoming enamored of the world and started in my head writing a romantic comedy that took place on an island off the coast of Maine in the off season, inside the fishery industry, inside of the lobstering industry. And this unlikely character, this female lead, who ends up sort of falling accidentally into this world. And so I was having fun with it. And I was like, well, what would be great is if somebody took me, who knows so little about any of this, onto a boat. Like, I feel like the comedy would write itself because I have no idea what I'm doing.
So was Mike able to arrange for you to do some observing aboard lobster boats?
I wasn't ever allowed on the back of the boat when I was riding along for research because of the ropes and the danger and just not the captain not wanting me to get caught up in the gear and swept overboard. But they would always let me fill the bait bag because nobody really wants to fill bait bags. And his bait had turned and gone rancid because his cooler had broken. And so I was stuffing bait bags with maggoty bait, and I still had the time of my life. And I was like, there's something weird about the fact that I just spent my day with maggots. And I'm like, let me know if I can ever go out with you again.
Stepping out once again from our conversation, I want to tell you about an event that was to become a real turning point for Anna. The Maine Fishermen's Forum is a 3-day annual event held over the first weekend in March every year at the Samoset Resort in Rockport, Maine. Now, the forum brings together fishermen, sea farmers, gear suppliers, state and federal scientists and regulators, and other stakeholders for education, collaboration, commerce, and more. Anna's husband, Mike, was responsible for introducing Anna to this unique event where her curiosity about the sea and all things lobster-related were once again piqued.
Yeah, I had never heard of it, because I wasn't in industry, but Olympia would send Mike, to go and it's such a unique experience because the Samoset is, in my mind, a pretty fancy place. And it's quite dead in the month of March. The place just sort of shuts down and is overrun by lobstermen, members of the industry. There's classes and educational experiences, and there's a sort of a trade fair. So like people who come from all different parts of the industry to like show new gear. It's this very layered cultural experience that is just in full support of the lobstermen and the lobster industry. Their family comes, there are events for the kids, there are events for the family.
It sounds like you had a blast.
It was so fun. And the people that I met, I just thought, like, how can I know more of these people? How can I be part of this?
So your first opportunity to actually work as a sternman, did that come as a result of someone you met at the forum?
And I don't know if it was at the forum that we first met Elliot, but Mike knew Elliot Thomas from Yarmouth, who was the captain of the fishing vessel Tiffany T. He and Mike connected, I think, through science and through Woods Hole, but also through the Maine fishery. Elliot had been a geologist in his previous career. When he was a young man, he had been a sternman on a boat out of New Hampshire, which is where he grew up. And then he was a geologist for the EPA for a long time, and he started fishing, and he had his offshore license. Like, he had been fishing for 26 years by the time I ended up on his boat, and he had been fishing alone. So he and I met through Mike, and we went out on a ride along with him when I was pregnant with my child, which was about 16 years ago. And he was just really kind and really smart and really he ran a tight ship, and he was really involved in the science of things. Like, he was a great lobsterman, but he was also working with Woods Hole, collecting water temperature, tracking the temperature of the water in the Gulf of Maine and sending that information on to them so that they knew they had a better snapshot of what was going on up here. He knew a lot about the things we were catching. He loved teaching. He loved talking about the things that we were pulling up in the traps. And I really liked him.
So some years later, you call up Elliot and essentially reintroduce yourself and
see if he would consider taking me on as a sternman. And a sternman, I had observed several times from the boat, but I had never, other than filling bait bags, really had not even tasted like the top coat of what that experience was. A sternman's job on a boat is basically to be the right hand of the captain and to run everything on the back of the boat. So the captain drives the boat. The captain, brings the traps up on the winch, pulls them up onto the rail, and it's the sternman's job to support the captain in any way, but to empty the traps, take all the bycatch out and throw it back.
And does that routine vary boat to boat?
Depending on the boat that I'm on, a captain will take more or less charge of the lobsters, the measuring of the lobsters, the banding of the lobsters. It really depends on the captain. But the sternman's job is to turn those traps over quick, rebait them, and bring them to the back of the boat. Some boats have a stern. They have a transom on the back, and you slide the traps down to the transom. Elliot's boat had a transom. Some boats don't have a transom, like my current captain. It's an open stern boat, so I have to lift the traps and put them onto the deck.
So with some practice, it really becomes a routine.
Basically, it's just a factory line of moving stuff. But in addition to that, you're helping the captain out on the boat in whatever way that captain wants to be supported. So sometimes it's rowing out in the dinghy and getting the boat. Sometimes it's, moving the bait or fixing traps. It's, there are a million things a sternman does, but basically you are the right hand of the captain, and you are ready, and you are paying attention, and you're not messing things up. Being strong, being ready, and doing what the captain needs.
So it really sounds as if you found your niche.
I specialize in the aging lobsterman. I've fished with 3 different lobstermen as a stern. And the thing that they've had in common is, like, they're working at their own pace. They're their own boss. It isn't or wasn't their primary career. Elliot, like I said, was an EPA geologist. Obviously he fished while he was doing that, but like for the three captains that I have fished with, it is mostly a passion and a curiosity, and their goal is to actually recoup their expenses and make money and have that extra income. But I think really for all three of them, it's so much part of who they are and what brings them happiness. But I think there's something that being on the water offers people with busy minds, or maybe people who have a hard time being with their own thoughts, day to day on land. There's something about being on the water that keeps you engaged, that connects you to nature.
That makes sense.
And I think the human brain loves a horizon line. Like, I think to look across a horizon line and to see the sun and to see the waves, or the way the waves are cutting on that day, and whether there are horse tails whipping across, and like there's just something innately deep in my brain that is like calmed and centered by being on the water. And I think for the captains that I have fished with, there's something about being on the boat and hauling traps that brings them, if not intense joy, then incredible calm.
Yeah, Anna, the onset of COVID took its toll on so many people all over the world. But for you, it meant staying off the water for 2 years. How did that affect you?
I really missed it, and then by that time, Elliot had retired, and Brian Tarbox, who's a very good friend of his, who we shared a dip tank with and shared a float with. And I ran into him, and I was walking the dog during the pandemic. And I ran into Brian up at SMCC because that's where he works. And I was like, "Hey, Brian, how are you?" "Good, good. Well, rough summer. My sternman's injured. His sister had been injured, and he was down a sternman." And I was like my breath started to speed up. I was like, and he's like, "You wouldn't be free, Anna, would you?" And I was like, yes, I wasn't free. I made myself free. It was like the boy you had a crush on finally was like, "You free Friday night?" You're like, "No, but I will clear my schedule." And he was like, "Great." And so I walked away and around the building, and I burst into tears. I started sobbing. I was so happy. And my husband, who's used to these sort of emotional experiences with me, he's like, you're so funny. He's like, "Why are you crying?" I'm like, "Because I'm so happy that I'm going to get on a boat again." And so I fished a little bit with Brian that summer. And I was like, I've got to get this back into my life, because especially during the pandemic, I was coaching on Zoom all the time. I was at my desk all the time. I was supporting people who were having a really hard time. And I wasn't going out into nature. I wasn't grounding myself the way that I had been when I was working on the boat. I pushed myself too far in terms of like what I was capable of giving emotionally and psychologically as a coach. And I was like, I need to split the difference. I need to be able to coach my clients, which I love, but I need to be able to spend the summer on a lobster boat. And I had no idea how that was going to happen, because Brian's sister got better and she was not about to give up her spot.
She's not going to give up that spot, that's for sure. I think it's so interesting that, Anna, that we all find different ways to come to a sense of peace in our own lives and find a sense of meaning about what we're up to day. I think there's something that this experience has brought you that's pretty extraordinary.
I think we have access to these kinds of discoveries about ourselves, but we don't live in a culture that encourages that. And I think for some people, you're truly limited by, you might have the curiosity, but you don't have the fiscal possibility or the geographic possibility. And I think that's sort of where like the coaching of things comes in. It's interesting. After I started fishing, and that first wave of doubt passed, because there were people who were like, "Girl, you're not going to last a day." I had some weird reactions. There were some people who were like, who said you could do that?" was my favorite. I'm like, well, Captain Elliot Thomas did actually. And me, that it was this weird choice. I had a story that the history of Anna was just like one weird choice after another. Like, what's crazy Anna up to now? And then I got to a point where I was like, oh, I don't care anymore, right? The proving had sort of stopped. And when people noticed how much happier I was, and then also I'm posting stuff. I'm posting pictures about things that are coming up in the traps. I am posting, pictures of the captain, pictures of the boat, pictures of, everything and writing little tidbits about like, did you know this is how crabs mate? Or do you know this is how cod become flat? Like they start with an eye on either side and the eye migrates. It's insane. People were really interested. And so when I stopped fishing, I was surprised by how many people who reached out to me to ask me why I wasn't fishing anymore, that they felt disappointed. And I think we all have something or some things like lobstering for me.
So after the long COVID break, I know you came back and had not talked to your first skipper, Elliot, in some time, but then managed to find each other again. What was that like?
I'd been missing him. I hadn't heard from him in a while, so I called him up and invited him to breakfast. And it was my agenda that I'd be like, hey, what's up? Are you still fishing? Can I fish with you? Like I was completely getting ready to put the moves on Elliot in terms of getting back on the boat. He's like, all right, well, yeah, let's have breakfast. But I just want to let you know, I sold the boat and I was stunned. I didn't think he'd ever sell the boat. And this is the weird fantasy that I come up with. Elliot didn't have kids. And so I had fancied in my imagination, if Elliot were going to sell the boat or were going to retire, that he would give me first shot, or that, God bless, he'd be like, you know what would make me happy? Giving my boat to my sternman. So I had this elaborate fantasy wherein I would inherit the Tiffany tea and off I'd go.
As a little girl, I'm going to bet that you didn't dream of finding yourself on the aft end of a lobster boat when you grew up.
When I was growing up, I really thought that I wanted to be like the next Meryl Streep or the next Gilda Radner. But over the last several years, since I have learned about Virginia Oliver, who is this woman who grew up on lobster boats and has been basically fishing her whole life. She's now 103 years old. She's still the captain of her own lobster boat. Her 80-year-old son is her sternman, but she's been fishing since she was a young woman, and she goes out, from what I understand, every day, at least during the season. I don't think she goes deep offshore at this point in the off season. I think she stays close to home, but she's out there fishing, driving the boat, hauling her traps, and she's 103. And so I no longer want to win an Oscar. I want to be a 103-year-old lobster lady.
Well, I can see that in your future. Anna, thanks for joining me today. This has been great fun. Anna and I continued our conversation for quite some time, and I promised her we may need to do a second episode of Anna's adventures on the high seas. That's a wrap for this episode of Tales of the Sea. If you enjoyed it, as I hope you did, please tell your friends. Until the next time, this is Mark Winkworth.